It's just an ongoing thing. It expires in about a year, and we'll either let it expire or we'll maybe work out another deal with Mexico and Canada.
I'm not looking to renew it. I don't, I made the deal, and the primary reason I made the deal is that NAFTA was the worst trade deal I've ever seen, and I made it better, but I had the right to terminate,
We warned this was coming. For months, we said the most dangerous part of CUSMA was not just the tariffs, it was the review clause. Because buried inside the agreement was a pressure lever that could turn North American trade from a stable legal system into a permanent negotiation. Now Trump has pulled that lever. CUSMA is not dead today. It has not been completely suspended. Trucks are still crossing. Factories are still shipping. Auto parts, food, machinery, steel, aluminum, energy products, and consumer goods are still moving across North America. But the certainty that made CUSMA valuable has just been damaged. The United States has refused to extend the agreement in its current form. That means the deal remains alive. But instead of a clean 16-year renewal, North America now enters annual reviews and a countdown toward 2036, unless Canada, the United States, and Mexico agree on changes. That is the real story. Trump did not kill CUSMA. He made certainty negotiable. And in trade, certainty is not a detail. Certainty is the product. Trade analysts have a name for this kind of limbo. It's zombie mode. The agreement is still alive, but it no longer behaves like a stable foundation. It keeps moving, but every year it has to be reviewed again. Every year, the same question returns. Every year, investors, exporters, automakers, farmers, and governments have to ask whether the rules will survive the next political fight. That is why this moment matters so much. It lands after months of tariff escalation, sector-by-sector pressure, and open threats against Canada and Mexico. So the legal shield has not disappeared, but it has been weakened at the exact moment North America needed certainty most. But wait a minute, because this is where the headlines can mislead people. Some will say CUSMA is finished. That is not true. Some will say nothing has changed because the agreement still exists. That is also not true. The agreement is still operating, but the legal confidence behind it has been weakened. And for companies making billion-dollar decisions, that difference matters. A factory does not invest because a trade agreement exists today. It invests because it believes the rules will still be there tomorrow. An auto company does not design a North American supply chain for one election cycle. It plans for years. A farmer does not build export relationships only for one season. A steel company, a parts supplier, a food processor, a logistics firm, a port operator, and a trucking company all need one thing before they commit capital. They need rules they can trust. That is what Trump has just shaken. And if you have followed this channel, this should not surprise you. We said the 2026 review was not just paperwork. We said it was a political weapon waiting to be used. Trump had been telling us this for weeks. He said he was not interested in renewing the agreement. He complained that Canada and Mexico had taken advantage of the United States. He said the US could either let the deal expire or work out another arrangement. And he repeatedly framed CUSMA not as a stable operating system, but as a deal he could reopen, pressure, split or replace. That language matters. Because Trump was not just criticizing one clause. He was attacking the idea that North American trade should be predictable unless Washington gets more. That is the shift. CUSMA was supposed to fix NAFTA. It was supposed to modernize the rules, protect supply chains, update digital trade, clarify labor rules, tighten auto content requirements, and preserve duty-free trade for qualifying goods. Trump once praised it as his replacement for what he called the worst trade deal ever. But now the same agreement he once championed has become another instrument of pressure. The US position is that the deal has shortcomings. Washington wants to address trade deficits with Canada and Mexico. It wants more reshoring of manufacturing. It wants tougher rules of origin, especially in autos and industrial goods. It wants to prevent other countries, especially China, from using Canada or Mexico as a backdoor into the US market. It wants more American content in products that qualify for North American trade treatment. Those are the official arguments. But the deeper political message is simpler. The United States wants the benefits of North American integration, but with more American control over how that integration works. And that is why this decision matters so much for Canada. CUSMA protects a large share of Canadian exports from the full force of Trump's tariff agenda. It does not protect everything. We have seen US pressure on steel, aluminum, autos, lumber and other sectors. But for compliant goods, CUSMA has still functioned as one of Canada's most important legal shields. That shield is not gone, but it is now less certain. And uncertainty itself is a cost. If you are a Canadian auto parts supplier, do you expand production when the US might demand new rules next year? If you are a manufacturer in Ontario, do you invest in a cross-border supply chain when the agreement is now reviewed annually? If you are an energy company, an agricultural exporter, or a logistics firm, do you build around a system that Washington is openly using as leverage? This is how trade pressure works. It does not always start with a wall. Sometimes it starts with a question mark. And the question mark is enough to slow investment, raise borrowing costs, delay decisions, and push companies to wait. That is why Canada's immediate response has been calm but careful. Ottawa is not saying the agreement is dead. Canada is saying CUSMA remains fully in force and can still be renewed. That is important. Canada does not want panic. It does not want markets, manufacturers, farmers, exporters or workers to believe the North American trade system collapsed overnight. But Canada also understands what just happened. The agreement that was supposed to provide stability has become unstable by design. That is the new reality. And this is where the story connects to everything we have been covering. The Gordie Howe Bridge showed Canada's vulnerability at the physical gate. Canada can finance infrastructure, build the bridge, and prepare the corridor. But if the US controls the final gate, Canada still faces leverage. The CPKC rail corridor showed the next move. Canada cannot remove America from the map, but it can reduce dependence on some American choke points by building cleaner routes into Mexico. Then came oil. America says it does not need Canadian energy, but US refineries still depend heavily on Canadian crude. That showed Canada's hard power card, but also the importance of routes, buyers, and export optionality. Now, CUSMA brings the whole story to the legal level. The bridge was the gate. The railway was the route. Oil was the hard resource. CUSMA is the operating system. And now the operating system itself has entered zombie mode. It still runs, but nobody can pretend it is stable anymore. That is the danger. Because once a trade agreement becomes a permanent negotiation, every investment decision becomes political. Every factory becomes exposed. Every supply chain becomes conditional. Every exemption becomes a bargaining chip. And every year becomes another chance for Washington to demand more. That does not mean Canada should walk away from CUSMA. That would be reckless. The US is still Canada's largest trading partner. Mexico is still a crucial North American partner. The three economies are deeply connected through autos, agriculture, energy, manufacturing, logistics, finance, digital services, and labor. The question is not whether Canada should abandon North America. The question is whether Canada can survive inside North America if the rules are rewritten every year. That is Carney's problem now. He cannot simply say everything is fine. It is not. But he also cannot treat this as the end of the agreement. It is not that either. The real challenge is to negotiate without looking desperate, defend Canadian sectors without triggering panic, and accelerate diversification without pretending the US no longer matters. That is a very narrow path. Canada has to hold the CUSMA shield as long as possible, while building alternatives fast enough that the shield is no longer the only protection. More trade with Europe, more export options through the Pacific, more Mexico strategy, more domestic processing, more infrastructure that Canada controls, more resilience in sectors that Washington can pressure, because the lesson is now impossible to ignore. Trump did not need to tear up CUSMA to create leverage. He only needed to refuse certainty. And that may be even more powerful. A dead agreement creates a crisis. An uncertain agreement creates dependence. Every year, Canada and Mexico come back to the table wondering what Washington will demand next. Every year, investors ask whether the rules will survive. Every year, the US can turn renewal into pressure. That is why this is not just a trade story. It is an economic sovereignty story. CUSMA is still alive, but the trust that made it powerful has been weakened. And this is exactly what we warned about. The review clause was never just a legal footnote. It was the lever. Now Trump has pulled it. The question is what Canada does next. Does Ottawa fight to preserve CUSMA as the foundation of North American trade, or does it use this moment to accelerate a much bigger diversification strategy before the 2036 clock runs out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger economic picture, hit the like button, share this video with someone following Canada-US trade tensions, subscribe to Trad Economics, and turn on notifications for more analysis on trade, infrastructure, energy, supply chains, and geopolitics beyond the headlines.